online series by ILSS. I'm Archana from the ILSS team. And over the next few minutes, before we go into the actual session, I'll share just a quick introduction about our journey at ILSS. ILSS is a learning and leadership development organization that builds and strengthens leadership in India's social sector. And if you look at our journey, we launched almost 3 years ago with our flagship leadership development program. And this was to help senior professionals from diverse fields to learn about and to transition into the social sector in leadership roles. Very happy to share that we've completed 7 cohorts of the program. And today we have over several alumni who moved to the social sector and are doing a variety of things, right? Some of them are in leadership roles, some of them are serving as board members and advisory members, and some of them have started their own organizations in the social sector. So that's something we feel really, really happy about. The second thing that we've done is actually, this is a newer intervention for us, which is looking at programs for social sector professionals. So the fundraising program was our first program that we launched earlier this year. And our first cohort is 50 social sector leaders who are learning about fundraising and communications. And they're doing this from learning from industry leaders. They have their own group of mentors, as well as learning with one another. We're actually roughly now at halfway through the program, and we've been thrilled so far with what we've been hearing, because when participants tell us, hey, you know, I tried this tip or I tried this strategy, and I'm actually seeing this have an impact on the fundraising pursuit, ultimately that's what we want for the program and more importantly for the sector. The third pillar of our work, which is where we are all meeting today, is the ILSS online platform, where we continue to bring to you thoughtfully created, curated sessions by some of the top social impact leaders, practitioners, academicians, as well as policymakers. I have the pleasure of welcoming Anurag Behar. We're going to come back to Anu in a minute. So let me just go to Anurag and come back to Anu. So Anurag really needs no introduction to most of us. I'm going to really try to do this. Anurag, as all of us know, has been engaged with efforts to improve education in India for the past 16 years. He's been a vocal advocate for the critical importance of public systems, in particular the public education system. And his many years in business have given him an insider's view to both the possibilities as well as what are some limitations of the market and what's really possible in this work. Anurag's also played earlier leadership roles in the business division and continues to be associated with Wipro, providing oversight to the social and ecological initiatives of the Wipro Group as its Chief Sustainability Officer. He's also a member of Wipro's Group Executive Council. Anurag was elected as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum in 2008, and as several of us know, writes widely, including a fortnightly column for the newspaper Mint, which I know several people who are attending today continue to follow and read very regularly. A big, big welcome to you, Anurag. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And in conversation with Anurag will be our founder and CEO, Anu. I know most of us here know Anu, but I'm going to keep this really short.
Yeah.
I've also been a corporate leader who's crossed over to the social sector. And before this was the founding deputy dean of the Young India Fellowship and also a founding member of Ashoka University. And so today we're going to use this time to have Anu in conversation with Anurag on education, Azim Premji Foundation, and much more. Pause and over to you, Anu.
Thank you so much, Archana. Anurag needs no introduction, and we're so thrilled to have you here. You know, a lot of our the cohort that's attending this program are corporate mid to senior leaders looking at moving into the sector. It would be lovely to hear what was your story. I mean, you were a successful CEO of, Wipro, ran many businesses very successfully. What was the genesis of the journey into the foundation and onward? We'd love to hear that.
Well, thank you, Anu and Archana for inviting me. Pleasure to be here. And I'm just this average middle-class Indian boy who drifted into engineering, not knowing what else can one do. It's a long time ago. And towards the end of my engineering, I think I took the first conscious decision or a first thoughtful decision that I won't leave India, because when I graduated from engineering, in some senses, the default option was go to the United States and do your master's and then PhD, which I didn't do. So that's, I guess, the first thoughtful decision I took. But then, again, I drifted, which is that if you don't go to the United States, what do you do? Well, everybody does an MBA, let's do an MBA. Then I drifted into an MBA, drifted out of the MBA, and then I had to pick a job at some point. So then I again took the second thoughtful decision, which is that I chose to work for Wipro. And there's a very specific reason that I chose to work for Wipro, which is that when I was in engineering college, Wipro had a interesting reputation. One, that it has a reputation. Not every company had a reputation, and I'm talking about the mid 80s. The reputation was that Wipro is a techie's delight. I mean, if you really are a techie, go to Wipro. I was not a techie. I was a failed engineer. But the other part of the Wipro reputation was that this was a strange company. And remember, I'm talking about the mid 80s. This is a strange company which would not bribe at all. Come what may, it would not bribe. So there were these stories oft repeated about how a 50 paisa bribe was refused for a 50 lakh order. And of course, they lost the order. And this is not, we knew it was not sales spiel, because these stories were told to us by our seniors who had joined Wipro. So, that mattered more than anything to me. So I didn't really think about it. I said, well, if I join this company, at the very least, this is not there. And that's, unfortunately, I can't say that India has very changed from then, but it's somewhat changed. But certainly in those days, this company was truly exceptional, absolutely unique, I would say. So I joined Wipro. I joined Wipro in the joint venture that Wipro had with GE, which is the Wipro GE healthcare business. I worked there for many years, and then I moved to the corporate office with a few roles, and very soon I took responsibility for the high precision manufacturing business of Wipro, which is not so well known. It's called Wipro Infrastructure Engineering, makes hydraulic components. Now, of course, it's spread across the entire world, manufacturing facilities across all continents. So I took up that responsibility. But it didn't take too long for my boss and me, fortunately, both of us, to discover that I had little or no interest in business. So at some point in time, he asked me that, looks like you have no interest in business. So would you want to move to the foundation? So I didn't think about it twice. I mean, I didn't think, like in a heartbeat, I said yes. So that's how I moved. And of course, there's a bit to that story which is perhaps the most influential part of my life story, is this, that I had grown up in a household where my father was, basically involved in the same stuff that we're talking about, which is improving the public education system. So that's the life I had seen. That's the household I had grown up in. So it's not surprising that I had that kind of a thing at the back of my head or in my heart. In fact, I must say that having joined the private sector, I was sort of the black sheep in the family, having abandoned public service, the first person to have abandoned public service. So yeah, so I've been just like, extraordinarily lucky and blessed.
So Anurag, share with us that journey when you moved into the foundation. I would like to understand the foundation's journey and some sort of milestones within that journey, but also your journey, because you were in the private sector. And even though development was a discourse in the house, it must have still been a very new environment. So what was that for you? Anything that those first few years? And then, of course, I'd like to understand, what was the journey of Azim Premji Foundation? That would be great to hear.
So, I just now said that I've been extraordinarily lucky, and the run of my luck is truly extraordinary. So a part of my luck was that when I moved from the Wipro G healthcare business to the Wipro corporate office, what Mr. Premji asked me to do is to take responsibility to build Wipro's social initiatives. I hated calling it corporate social responsibility. I continue to hate calling it corporate social responsibility, but I took responsibility for that to build Wipro social initiatives. So there were these two things parallelly happening in our world at that point in time. The Azim Premji Foundation was being set up. Dilip Ranjekar had moved from being the HR head of Wipro to being the first CEO of the foundation. And in parallel, I was responsible for this setting up of the social initiatives of Wipro, the company, right? So what happened is that from that 2001-2002 period till 2010, which is when I moved full-time to the foundation, in some senses, I was going through an internship in the social sector. That's a really long internship, right? And that's why I said the run of my luck is extraordinary, that I had a boss who let me intern for 9 years in the social sector and run a business, both together. And of course, I was also involved to the extent I could be from the outside with the foundation. So when I did move to the foundation, it was not new at all, right? Nothing was really new. I had the people I knew, the dynamics I knew. I had, that's the usefulness of a 9-year internship, right? So my case is not a very good case to talk about as being replicable with anybody else. But, as a matter of, if I were to draw a principle out of it, right? It's quite clear that, and let's forget my family history for a moment, right? I think it's quite clear that I had such an, let's call it such an intense exposure to the social sector before I went in made all the difference. Yeah. Right? Made all the difference. So that's an important principle, which I have seen with others as well. Those who all their life have worked in business and want to move to the social sector. And one day, lo and behold, they say, I will move. And before that, they've never really done much, engaged in any way, any serious way, right? Not just showing up once in a while to donate blood, not that kind of stuff. I think they find it far more difficult. But people who have really seriously engaged, volunteered their time, volunteered their time to raise money, volunteered their time to do something significant, they do find this transition much easier. So that principle is very much there.
But what would you advise these people that are keen but have really not spent enough time engaging with this, have almost lived in a private sector bubble? How would you almost recommend that they do volunteering for a couple of years or a couple of months, or just really build out an understanding before making a full transition? Would that be something you feel that should be something they should do? Would that be something you'd advise them?
Yeah, I would actually very strongly urge them to do that. Very strongly urge them to do that. It's a very different world.
Yeah.
It's a very different world. And, I've been a part of that world, so I can say it with personal experience, that world gives you false confidence. The world of business gives you false confidence.
Yeah.
And it all falls apart once you go into the social sector.
Yeah.
So it's better that your illusions are, either destroyed or at least diminished while you are within the business sector. So I would really encourage, and it's 2 months is not enough. And it's like you give it 5 years, because you are doing a pretty heavy duty business role. So give it 5 years. Give your time. And if you're really thinking about seriously switching, then you might as well invest your time 5 years prior to that volunteering, and volunteering seriously, right? I mean, when I say volunteering seriously, for instance, I don't mean volunteering for fundraising. The social sector is not that, right? I mean, fundraising is very important, but that's not what the social sector. So when I'm saying volunteering, I'm meaning volunteering in, let's say, the core line of the work, right, in some way.
Anurag, for people that may not know, and I don't know who those are, but in any case, I'm going to ask you this question. What has been the evolution of the foundation? What were some key milestones where you may have, pivoted some of your thinking or relooked some of your thinking over the last 2 decades? And also, I really want to know about COVID. So, but I'll come to that later. But, just how the foundation began, what are some of the key milestones that the foundation has, what are some of the thinking?
Yeah, sure. So, Mr. Premji has said this publicly very often, but it's worth repeating that he was studying electrical engineering in Stanford when his father passed away, and he had not completed his degree. He had to come back. There was nobody else in the family to run the business. He came back and he took responsibility of Wipro. But when he did that, what was there in his mind is he didn't see his future as a business person. He really wanted to join the, let's call it the social sector. In those days, the meaning of social sector was different. His idea was that perhaps he'll join the UN or the World Bank or some stuff like that, right? But he wanted to dedicate his life to public service. And very clearly, there's no ambiguity about that. The two greatest influences on his thought were, one is Mahatma Gandhi, and the second is, of course, his own mother, who had set up this charitable hospital for children in Haji Ali in Bombay. And all his life, he had seen his mother run that hospital, right? So, but, unfortunately, things happened the way it did. And he came back, he became a businessman. And of course, he became a very successful businessman. But something as deep as that, right, doesn't go away. So I think it's in maybe by 99, roughly 99, 2000, he was quite clear that what he really wanted to do after all this business success was really put all the money that, or the value that he had created in the service of public. So he, 99, 2000 is when he and Dilip Ranjekar, my colleague, they went around the country trying to figure out what should they do. And, it was a very practical, pragmatic approach. It's not as though they hired some fancy consultants to develop a strategy or stuff like that. They went around, tried to figure out what should they do. And by the end of 2000, they just took a decision that, well, looks like lots of things can be done, which is true. Pretty much anything if you do seriously in this country is useful and valuable. So they said, looks like we resonate with the idea of working with education. Right? So let's work with education. So 2001, the foundation was formed, and with the mandate that let's work with education. Those first 2 years, 2001 to 2003, was what I would call the first phase of our life. And we took, I think, a few absolutely critical decisions, which have remained the animating spirit or the animating force for us even today and will remain. Right? And those decisions were, one, why are we here? We are here because we want to contribute towards a just, equitable, humane society. In other words, how do we contribute towards developing a country which is actually living the values that we have promised ourselves in the Constitution? Right? So that's the first thing, and that is why you're here for. That's not change at all, right? So that's one. Second, we therefore think of education as serving that purpose. And therefore, we'll work with education for that purpose. And that's a very important choice, because what it meant is that we did not see education as a, let me call it, narrowly instrumental about creating employment or generating employment. Not that that's not important, but we saw education is this fundamental social process for developing a good society. So that's second. The third was that therefore, we also decided that we'll work with the public education system. We will not create an alternative system. We'll not work with the private schooling system, because the public education system is not just the fact that it does serve the disadvantaged and the underprivileged, but in reality, the public education system is the foundation for a sound democracy. So those three key decisions we took, and towards the end of that period, and that fourth decision sort of defines or marks the end of the first phase of our life. At the end of 2002, sometime 2003, we decided that we will not be a grant-making organization. We'll be an operating organization. And the reason for that was quite simple, that we realized that as hard as it is to get money, raise funds, and of course, we did not have that problem, it's really hard to execute things in this country. Right? Really, really hard to execute things in this country. So we basically took a decision that we will become an operating organization. And that's how we became an education organization. Right? So then you enter into the second phase of our life, which is 2003 to 2009-10, the 6-7 years. And in those 6-7 years, we worked, I would say, on every dimension of education. When I say dimension, I mean capacity of teachers, of head teachers, of other education leaders, on assessment, testing, on curriculum, textbook development, all kinds of stuff, right? So every dimension of education we worked on. And we worked across, I forget the exact number, with 17 states, I think. And all our work was in close collaboration with the state governments, right? And I think, like any other organization, we made a lot of mistakes. We made, I think we learned a fair bit. And then you come at 2009, 2010, and that's sort of the end of the second phase of our life and the beginning of the third. And what marks that time is the question that Mr. Premji put back to us. And the question was quite simply this, that look, I'm absolutely convinced that this is what I want to do with everything I have, right? And that everything is quite a bit of everything. So everything that I have. So what is it that you will do, right? What is it that you will do? So there was this period of about a year and a half, where we went through sort of an assessment, a review of what we had done, what we had learned, and not just what we had learned and what we had done, but also with a very large number of people who understand the stuff, the education stuff very well, right? And not just in India, pretty much across the world, but certainly focused in India. And at the end of that period, in 2009, 2010, we took some key decisions that sort of have shaped us eventually. Now, just so that I'm clear, those decisions were building upon the prior decisions. They're not in any way, they're strengthening the prior decisions, that we are here for a just, equitable, humane society, that we will work for public education and so on, right? So the decisions that we took in 2009, 2010 was that, one, working in education is not about projects and programs. You cannot do it. You need, wherever you want to work, you need a permanent presence. You actually need to institutionalize what you're doing, right? And therefore, if you look at us today, our work got converted from these projects and programs that we were doing to setting up institutions across the country wherever we were working. So, let's say if we work in Badmer in Rajasthan, we actually have a district level institution. We have lots of my colleagues who live in not just in Badmer, but in small towns around Badmer and so on, right? So that decision was, we'll work not through projects and programs, but we'll work by establishing institutions, which meant a few specific things. One, that we are there permanently. We're not there for a while and we'll go away. We're there. We're a part of Badmer, right? Illustratively. Two is also that if you want to work in Badmer, and I'm using Badmer both as an illustration and as a metaphor, right? So if you want to work in Badmer, you can't work in Badmer from Jaipur, least of all from Bangalore. You got to be there. Right? So institution because that's permanence, in local institutions because you have to be there. Right? So those were two key decisions that we took. And the third key decision was that we will continue to work on all dimensions, which is capacity of individuals, curriculum, policy, assessment, etc. And we'll work at every level, which is we'll work directly with school teachers, cluster level, block level, district level, state level, government of India, right? So we are exactly what we set out to do at that point in time. So we are organized around institutions across the country, and we have deep ground presence across, at this moment, I think 49 districts. Deep ground, we work in other places also, but we have deep ground presence in 49 districts. Now, in that period of 2009, 2010 to 2016, a couple of other things happened. One was that we set up the university, and the university was a direct outcome of this decision to set up institutions. We had acutely felt the need for a higher education institution serving the social sector in 2004. Yeah. But at that point in time, we were not very clear about how to do it, what to do, etc. But this whole decision of setting up institutions and working through institutions, one integral part of that decision was we'll set up the university in Bangalore. And what will the university do? In very simple terms, the university will serve the same purpose. Will serve the social sector. Will run teaching and research programs in education, public health, livelihoods, development, and so on and so forth. So we ended up setting up the university. Now the university is 10 years old. Seems like yesterday, but it is 10 years. And so that's one important development that happened in that period. And then in 2014, 2015, we took another absolutely critical decision, which is that, we realized very simply, what we realized was that we are an operating organization. And an operating organization, its capacity to absorb money is dependent on operational scale up. So just because we have this extraordinary large endowment, it doesn't mean that, like I said, we have deep ground presence in 49 districts. Just because we have this huge amount of endowment, it's not as though tomorrow we can have deep ground presence in 400 districts. It doesn't happen. It doesn't work, right? So the university, right? So, yes, we are going to set up another university. We're setting up another university, hopefully in Bhopal. We'll set up a third university in the Northeast. But the rate of operational scale up is the rate of operational scale up. So our ability to absorb money gainfully to the benefit of society was limited by that rate. And it felt that it was the highest degree of irresponsibility if we were to sit on all that money, hoping that we'll somehow scale up our operations. And that's how we set up what we call Philanthropic Initiatives, which was essentially just a standard grant-making organizations, right? And that's how we got into providing financial support to other not-for-profit organizations. Of course, we've gone about it in the past 4 or 5 years, including specific areas, specific fields, right? So as you look at us today, that's the way we are. You want to roughly characterize us. We have this, continuing to have large, significant presence extensively in the field, where we work directly with the public education system at all levels, from the ground to policy. We run the university in Bangalore. We're setting up a university in Bhopal. And then we have this grant making, which also has scaled up a fair bit over the past 5 years.
It's fascinating, Anurag, because what you're sharing about that vision of 2000, 2001, there is so much resonance in the education policy that has come out. It's almost like, and I'm going to come to the new education policy and ask you questions on that, but it seems like there's so much of resonance there, in the way you looked. And also, it's interesting that when Mr. Premji was looking at where, what to do, he traveled the country. It's almost Gandhian, because that's what Gandhiji did. He actually traversed the country, the length and breadth of the country when he first came to India to understand the country. Interesting. Tell us a little bit about Mr. Premji. He's an inspiration to all of us. In fact, Ashish, who is our anchor donor at ILSS, always talks about in contemporary history. He looks up to Mr. Premji. We'd love to hear from you. How has he been for you as a mentor? If you could share a little bit. I know he's a very private person, but we'd just love to hear a little bit about his role in your life, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, so
yeah, I know it. Yeah.
Well, the thing is that I am very blessed, right? So I mean, to have a boss like this is quite amazing, and actually, I partly say this jokingly, partly I'm serious about it, that I cannot think of any role in the world which I will trade my role for. Right? Where in the world does a person get the opportunity where somebody says that, well, here's about $20 billion and do some good. So, so this is like a dream. I should wake up. That's my greatest dream. So, well, he's so, you're right. He's a very private person. He's talked about a lot, written about a lot, but he's so private that I guess it's very hard to know him from the outside. Maybe a few things, which is that one that, you see, there's something even more remarkable about him than this staggering philanthropy that he has done. There's something even more remarkable, which is not very well known. It's very hard to know this from the outside, which is that, he's a person who is completely and totally, absolutely empowering. Let me convert it into reality, which is as hard as it is for somebody to, or as extraordinary as it is for somebody to give away $20 billion or whatever the number, it just keeps growing. So whatever that number is, it's even harder for that person or any person to say, look, this money you guys take and you guys should do what is right. I am not the person who knows what is the right thing to do. I know what I want done. I want justice. I want equity. I want humaneness. I feel for this little girl, but I don't know what to do. You guys figure it out. Now that's totally extraordinary. I think it's unparalleled. So, and it's not just as though he's done with the foundation. That's the way he's built Wipro. So amongst my privileges, one privilege is that I was responsible for a business. I was CEO of one of the 3 businesses of Wipro, and I'm the CEO here as well. So it's exactly true. That's the way he is, which is that, he's very involved and very engaged. One shouldn't think that he's not involved and engaged, but he's absolutely not interfering, at all, absolutely, right? So the joke in the foundation is that if you ask one of my colleagues, let's say, again, in the same metaphorical barmer, that ये तो Azim Premji Foundation, Azim Premji ji ka foundation hai. So that's a funny thing. Azim Premji ji ka foundation hai. So they will say कि क्या बोल रहे हो? ये Azim Premji ji ka foundation नहीं है, ये मेरा foundation है. Okay. Now, where does the sentiment come from? Right? It comes because he is what he is. So, it's truly remarkable. I like I said, I think it's unparalleled. And people can say, well, he's my boss. What else will I say? I can only say nice things about him. But if you work with Mr. Premji, the other thing that you realize, and I was very young when I started reporting to him, very, very young. It's 2 decades ago. And by then he was a legend and I was very young. So I witnessed it from right there and then. The other thing that that anybody who's worked at Wipro will tell you, is that the other absolutely remarkable thing about him is that he absolutely makes sure that people speak their mind, right? So if you worked in Wipro or you work wherever you work, I mean, Mr. Premji is not this awe-inspiring figure whom, you cannot challenge. In fact, the joke used to be that, whatever Mr. Premji says, people just go on challenging him, even when he's absolutely right, just for the heck of it. Right? So he's quite a remarkable man. I mean, it's not for nothing that he's been able to build what he's built in the past 50 years. He also has a very naughty sense of humor, which again, one won't know unless one knows him reasonably well. Yeah, it's been an absolute privilege. I mean, I don't know what to say, but one of my maybe the life's greatest privilege. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anurag. Even when I was asking you that question, I was thinking I need a little more time with to ask Anurag this question. It's 2 decades of journey together, but we have so many questions to ask you. Anurag, partnership with government for change that is scalable and sustainable is, we hear this all the time. You have to work with the government. You have to make a difference. You have to work with the government. That's something that APF has done and demonstrated in many ways. A lot of the audience sitting today are corporates. That government is this. What are some of the key lessons you could share about working with the government and you're working with the government on bringing about change and educational change?
So let's just take 3 things. There are many, but let's just take 3 things. The first one is that the government is not a monolith. There's nothing really called the government. There are people in the government, right? So any partnership, any collaboration, any work together, you're doing with people. And this notion that somehow we are working with the government, that's an unreal notion. And one has to be able to see it and accept it in that manner. And therefore, it comes with its perils. And the perils being that, if you're working at the state level, then, the principal secretary is getting moved around every year or every 6 months and so on and so forth. But that recognition is very important. And therefore, that recognition would lead you to some very specific things. For instance, then you realize that there's this whole notion that very many of my friends, colleagues, or when I was in business, I might have had myself, that you sign some MOU with the chief minister or the chief secretary and something happens. Nothing happens. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So, I mean, not because the chief minister is not well-intentioned, perhaps he or she is, but doesn't work. So what you would have to do is actually you'll have to build the relationship, the partnership, the credibility up and down the government system. And in fact, one should realize that the deeper your connections at the ground level, the greater the chances of your collaboration, partnership, work sustaining. And the reason for that is very simple, which is that the higher you go up in the hierarchy, the faster the musical chair. But if you're really at the ground level, let's take the education system, you'll have teachers who will work in the same school for 10, 15 years, 20 years. You'll have block education officers who might be there for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, right? Or cluster level people who are there 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Principal secretary, I mean, it's extraordinary occurrence if somebody sticks around for 3 years, usually a year, year and a half, 2 years, right? So this notion that the government is a monolith, somehow you partner with the government, I think one has to actually move away from that and understand the nuance and the reality of what really working with government is. And perhaps while there are many other nuances, the most important nuance being this, that you have to work across levels. Right? So that's one part. The second is this, that the second is, and I think this is a very important one, very, very important one, that the government is not full of dumb people. the government is not full of unsmart people, right? The government is actually full of very good people. So they have as many good people as we would have, or as many bad people as we would have. If you or me or anybody on this call, we were caught in their circumstances, then is the real test. Now, one can crib about it, that why is the governance culture like this, but then one has to crib about why is India like this, right? So let's face reality as it is. I mean, that's the way it is, right? So the efficacy of a government functionary is not merely a function of how competent he or she is, because he or she is as competent as we are, is a function of what she's entangled in, right? Now, that's a very important thing to understand, that the people in government are not incompetent. They're very competent. As many people are very competent as you would find in any of our organizations, right? That then leads you to the second point, then leads you to actually a greater degree of empathy and respect for those people, right? So I think that's the second critical thing, that if you're going to make it work, understand that they are competent people, and then you will have respect and competence rather than going out there saying, look, I have the answers. So that's second. Third, and like I said, there could be others. They are others, but I won't go into each one of them. The third is, see, we need to look at ourselves. Why should the government partner with us? We are not God's gift to the government. Why should they partner with us? I mean, it's like, I find it staggering. I find it staggering that business organizations and civil society organizations, they feel such an entitlement about this matter. Oh, the government must partner. They are not partnering, as though it's a big, big problem. Why should they partner with you? Please look at yourself. So why would they partner with you? They would partner with you, one, if you really have expertise. If you really have deep expertise on something, then they would partner with you. One. Two, if your intentions are to truly and genuinely help, if your intentions are that I'll do a project and I'll basically get onto television and essentially reap all the headlines for myself, that's not a good idea. Or it's a way of furthering my business interests in some way or the other, right? Or it's another way of personal glorification. So one is, why if you have expertise, they'll partner with you. Two is, if your intentions are the right intentions, they'll partner with you. And three, which is in some sense related to my second point, three is, if you give them respect, they'll partner with you. How do you behave with them? Right? I mean, I've seen myself amazing examples of this sense of entitlement, right? So behave with them. And when I say behave with them well, I don't mean behave well with the chief minister. You would behave well with the chief minister. I would behave well with the chief minister. But, behave with the same respect that you would behave with any human being, with a teacher or with the ASHA worker or with with the A&M or the Rojgar Sahayak or whoever you're dealing with. So I think these are very important things, and these may sound as very simple, but these are the things that I think have mattered by far the most. Absolutely.
No, absolutely. The deep insights. I'm going to, Archana, you have to keep me, because I could keep talking to Anurag for the next 6 hours. So you have to keep me online, because I know that the audience also wants to ask questions.
Yeah.
I'm going to just ask 3 more really quick. Well, I'm going to ask quickly, but I'd like to hear. One is, of course, coming to the new education policy. I mean, after 34 years, this new policy, visionary in the way that it shifted the narrative on education. In fact, I could see some of what you were talking about, how you all looked at education, in not as an economic sort of way of employability, but more holistic, more humane. what are, run us through the journey of the draft, and what was some of those thoughts? Because I think it's a wonderful policy, and also so what are some of the big shifts you see that will improve public education in India? And I think a lot of us here, certainly us at ILSS, truly believe in the public education system in India. So just if you could share, I've combined two questions in one because I'm mindful of time, but we really want to understand what has been your journey as a part of the committee, and what are some of the core principles. And guys, I must tell you, there's a wonderful video by Anurag that's 1 hour 57 minutes that actually goes into details on the policy that maybe we'll put as a link. Everyone should hear. It's just brilliant. So just putting that out there. But Anurag, over to you.
Well, I think, if you go back 2014, 2013, 2014, just before the general election, which brought the NDA to power, at that point in the manifesto of all the different political formations, there was a commitment to a new national education policy. And NDA came to power, and then they started the process of trying to formulate the education policy. It sort of went into a spin for many reasons. And eventually, I think the process started in all earnest only by May 2017. And Dr. Kasturi Rangan was the chairperson of the committee. And I think that was a wonderful choice, appointing Dr. Rangan as the chairperson for the committee was a wonderful choice because he's a widely respected figure across political aisles, across academic aisles, all kinds of stuff, right? So he was, I think, able to pull together I would say the wisdom and the knowledge and the sense and the aspirations of the entire country, right? And that's really important. So we went through a very consultative process. So, somebody has to draft it, and therefore there was a drafting committee. I was a part of that. But it's not as though that, let's say the 2-3 people who went and wrote it, actually, it's just our stuff. There's a widely consultative process. And that wisdom was sort of poured in, churned around, and then converted into what was a draft national education policy, which was submitted to the government of India in May of 2019. Right? So that's sort of briefly the process. The thing is that the mandate was quite clear. The mandate was that we've got to look at the entire education system for the next 20-25 years. And therefore, we have to look at the very fundamentals. There was nothing that was saying that, look, do a short-term thing or do something which is going to give you quick wins and stuff like that. So we did look at the most fundamental of aspects. Like you said, I know this is the stuff is so long that I can't go into it. But what was very satisfying at the end of it all was that the policy is truly reflective of a vision of good education and good education for good society, right? That's one. 2, it's an education policy which is unambiguously committed to the public education system. I find it, this is an aside comment, I find it truly hilarious when I read very many of my very valued colleagues in the education sector saying that the national education policy is encouraging privatization. So I don't know. I have not read a sentence in there. I can't figure out how they say that. But so it's good education for good society. It's this unambiguous commitment to public education. It's this unambiguous commitment to equity. That's very important. And if I may say it in the manner that I'm going to say it, which is that it commits to the idea of equity leading quality. And that's not a new thing from an education experience perspective, but it's such a central commitment. we know across education systems that if you push quality, equity never happens. So you'll have these islands of excellence happening. But if you push equity, quality will follow, right? Lastly, and when I say lastly, there are perhaps 1,000 things that we could talk about, but I would end with the fourth one, which is that lastly, it does not hesitate to confront some of the most fundamental issues that have plagued or limited or stunted Indian education. Illustratively, the kind of stance that it takes on what kind of changes are needed in the higher education regulatory systems, it is totally revolutionary, right? Absolutely revolutionary. It just completely changes the way the culture and institutions have been for higher education regulation. Or, for instance, the way it doesn't even mince words about the corruption and the dysfunction in the teacher education sector, right? Or if you were to look at something more progressive, not just problems, how it commits to the idea of early childhood education, right? And that's a big commitment. It's a huge, huge commitment. Right? So the fourth point being that it is unhesitating in confronting the problems and issues of our education system, and it's equally unhesitating in committing to the big things that are required and cannot be in any way jumped over or evaded. Yeah. So it's a wonderful thing. I have, people keep asking me this, that, so what about implementation? So I must confess that I'm not a part of the government. So I do not know what all will happen about the implementation. I think we should have a very pragmatic expectation around implementation. We still live in India. So like every other policy, some percentage of it will get implemented, some of it will not get implemented, some of it will get implemented in diluted form. And it's fine, It's fine because even if 20-30% stuff gets implemented, it's going to be very significant fundamental differences. That's one. And two, and very often in the worry about what will get implemented and not get implemented, we tend to forget that once the government is committed to a policy of this kind, the goalposts have gone further. So you're going to keep going from there, right? You're not going to retreat. So it's important in both ways, which is A, whatever percentage gets implemented, it's going to be some fundamental stuff. And B, the goalposts have gone, right? So you cannot be retreating. So you're going to measure yourself against what you committed and go on from there.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, but for me personally, Anurag, I studied BCom from class 6, from the age of 16. And now I discovered in my 40s that I didn't even like commerce. And I should have really had a more broad-based education. I'm a big proponent of liberal arts, of critical thinking, things that the policy talks about, and, more broad-based understanding before you can specialize. I think that's fantastic. We are at 50 minutes, Archana informs me. So I can only ask one more question. So I'm going to ask that question before I open it up to the audience and to Archana to take forward. The crisis, this rolled over us, and there have been lessons for all of us that have got, that are going through this crisis. It's still going on. And it's like, what has it taught you? And what do you feel has been, what have you witnessed in terms of civil society responses? What have you, what can you share from your learnings? Any lessons that you would like to share with our audience?
That needs an hour, no?
Okay, so Anurag, you have to come back. I'm sorry, but we have so much to ask you. You have so much to share. I'm sorry, but
I'll share something briefly. One is that I think it's so starkly amplified every structural inequity, discrimination, disadvantage that is there in our society. There is no escaping, I mean, you cannot, but it just stares you in the face, right? So what are we going to do about it, right? What are we going to do about this? So, I mean, not that we needed a wake-up call. I mean, we should not have needed a wake-up call in our country, but it's just staggering, right? Totally staggering, how this thing has amplified, how structurally we are wanting. And it's everywhere, all parts of our system, right? Whether it's social security, or whether it's public health, or is the way we make decisions. So everything. So I think that's one. Two is that I think this experience has been a very strong, I mean, it could not have been a stronger reaffirmation of the importance of frontline on the ground work. The only way things have worked is because of organizations that have frontline on the ground presence, right? So let's say on April 1, we decided that we will go all out, absolutely all out, right? We'll do everything we can. And the reason we could do whatever we could do was that we had our own roughly 1,700 people on the ground in those different 7 districts. Then we had these actually thousands of government school teachers that we work with, again on the ground. And then we had these roughly 450 to 500 odd partner organizations whom we have supported over the past many years, and they're again on the ground. And we had our university alumni on the ground, right? So it's this, all that really mattered was this on the ground presence, because everything was really failing otherwise, right? So I think the importance of the frontline on the ground work, the importance of investing in the frontline, the importance of giving respect to the frontline. And when I say frontline, I mentioned the teams that we worked with, right? But in the same breath, I mean the ASHA workers, the public school teachers, the A&M workers, and everybody who's out there in the front line. In fact, this is one of the key, I would say, one of the most important deficits in our country, that the front line of the public systems and the front line is staggeringly underinvested in. So that is, I think, the second important thing. I think we'll just leave it there. It's too much.
No, thank you so much, Anurag. Have you ever thought about being a teacher, Anurag? Because you're very good, and I like the way you have your 1, 2, 3, 4 parts. It's brilliant. It's a great class. I'm going to hand over to Archana for the audience questions.
Thank you so much, Anu and Anurag. It's a really difficult job. We had over 50 questions that came in from people, and I see a few more in the chat window now. I'm going to try and take a few from what we got earlier, as well as some of the live questions that we're seeing. So one of the first questions that I'd love to start with, Anurag, is what are some breakthroughs you've seen in recent times in school education that are perhaps impacting students at scale? And we have several educators here who are keen to see what are some breakthroughs that everyone can learn from. So we'd love to hear from you on
that. I hate to disappoint whoever asked the question. I have not seen any breakthroughs. And I hate to disappoint, not really because I've not seen any big breakthroughs. I hate to disappoint because I think the notion of breakthroughs in education is that assumption, that notion itself is flawed. There are no breakthroughs in education. Education is a complex, hard process. It happens always between a teacher and a student. So in that microcosm of the teacher and the student, there are all kinds of breakthroughs happening moment by moment. But these are not breakthroughs that you and I will see. And these are breakthroughs that a teacher and a student is repeating all the time, right? So we have to understand this about education, and I think about a lot of other things, that such things don't happen. We have to do the basic things right? We have to do the basic things right, basic things well, and we have to go on doing the same basic things over and over and over and over and over again. And that's what education is. It is about loving the child and the empathy with the student, and not some fuddy-duddy love, but it is about that. It's about, so there are no breakthroughs. I mean, I cannot. So what I can emphasize here is it's about getting the basics, and going on the basics all the time. And there's nothing called scale in education. Anybody who's trying to sell the idea of scale in education, scale is an industrial concept. This is not industry. Education is a social human process that happens between the teacher and the child, or the teacher and the student. There's no scale in education, which is why, and it's very funny why people don't look at it. There is no scaled up school, right? You can't say that I have a school here and I've scaled it up in Bilaspur or Shimla. It doesn't work. They are two different schools. You build up, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. As someone who's had the privilege of being in classrooms back in Chennai, I know that resonate a lot with that, Anurag. So thank you so much. In fact, a point that you mentioned, someone else had a very interesting question about the management discipline. And this person asks us, again, a nonprofit leader, in the social sector over the last decade or so, we've seen an increasing trend of almost management discipline making its way into the development sector, of course, with some contextualization. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm an MBA. So I have somehow found myself in education. See, there are two kinds of realities. One is that whatever we are doing, whether we are working in education, or we're working on the matter of livelihoods, or we're working with health, or whatever we're doing, it has to be managed, right? So, and management, therefore, managing is central. You cannot not manage. In fact, one of the issues that I find is in the social sector that I find is that sometimes there's some kind of a false, a false virtue that people think of, that we don't have management. That's dysfunctional. By the very nature of organizations, by the very nature of any endeavor which involves many people, there is management. Now, how do you do the management? That's a different matter. But the importance of management is very clearly there, right? So that's one part. So the central point from there is management that has to happen. Without management, you cannot do anything in the social sector like anywhere else. That's one. The second part is, I think, the very important fact that managing and management in education is not the same thing as managing and management in business. It is something else altogether. So is the case with public health. So is the case with any other social sector stuff, right? So I think that's the problem, is when management, the same word, which is really business kind of management, infiltrates the social sector with the same concepts, the same notions, the same commitments. That is deeply problematic. It becomes even more problematic when management people like me from the business sector show up in the social sector and say, look, I know how to manage because I've been this great management guy, right? So that's deeply problematic, right? So I think we need to be very cautious about the word management because it can mean very many things. I mean, it means something else here, it means something else there, right? We can't do without management in the social sector, but it's clearly not the same kind of management as is there in the business sector.
Definitely, Anurag. Thank you so much. I'm going to actually move to a question that we had live from one of the participants, Chandra, who had a question about improving public education systems also depends upon the political will. And so I'm just curious, this question was how is the foundation changing the mindset? I'm curious on what are your broader observations in the political will and what are some ways, what are some things, insights on that?
Well, the idea of political will eventually points back at us, right, citizens. So yes, I mean, there's no doubt that if we had the political will, many things would get done, and in the absence of political will, many things don't get done. It's true today. It was true 50 years ago. It will be true 50 years from now. Right? But that's just one of the truisms. It's very hard to grapple with that matter in the reality of things. Right? If you want to grapple with it, I think some of your graduates should become MLAs and member of parliaments and do something about it, right? or become activists of that sort. So yeah, political will is important, but there's nothing that we can do about it in this sphere. We should be politically engaged. I am all for deep political engagement, right? I think education is political, totally political in every way. But this is the kind of a matter which is beyond this kind of a discussion, and certainly about education, right? It is the political ethos of this country, and what are we doing about it as citizens?
Yes, what is it that we are doing is a good question to always think about. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to ask us next two questions about just overall the education system. So one of the questions that's come in from a participant is, what are your views on inclusion in the public education system? And with the NEP, do you see more inclusion happening? What's the scope for that? For example, for children with disabilities. And so what are your thoughts on that?
As I mentioned very briefly before, that National Education Policy 2020, conceptually, it leads with equity and quality follows. And equity is about inclusion. And therefore, there are very many basic principles on which the policy builds. And then there are specific things that will, when implemented, will drive inclusion. And when I say inclusion, it certainly means various categories of children and students who are disadvantaged or who are excluded for some reason or the other. It certainly is with children with disabilities, but it's not just children with disabilities. It is it's girls, it's women, it is transgenders, it is so very many categories, right? And I think there are specific actions and policy points that are enunciated within the policy. All of this is very hard. We should not be we should not delude ourselves to believing that because it's there in the policy, it's going to happen very quickly or very soon. All of it is really hard to make happen. But the important point is that at least this milestone is reached, that there's an explicit commitment to making it happen, right? Also, I must point out that not only does the policy pay attention to, let's for a moment call it the hardware of inclusion, which is making sure admission happens, are the facilities there, etc. Not only does it pay attention to the hardware of inclusion, and in hardware I'm including, like I said, facilities, admission, access, all that stuff. I'm calling hardware just for the sake of this question. It's not really hardware, but it also pays equal attention to the software of inclusion. right? The software being the culture of the system, the culture of the curriculum, the capacity of the teachers and the educators, the behavior of teachers and educators, right? So it pays, I think, equal attention. And the reason I point that out specifically is too often in our systems, we do end up paying attention to the hardware, what I have called hardware, but we are inadequately attentive to what is actually the heart of the matter, which really is the software, right? So I'm quite hopeful, and like I said, I'm quite hopeful in the sense that not everything will get implemented, but I'm quite hopeful that we would make progress over the next 5-10 years, significant progress on the matter of inclusion.
Thank you, Anurag. I know you mentioned it for the purpose of the question, but I think to be able to think about both the hardware, but also really what happens at the interaction of the student and the teacher, and to be able to think about that, the software elements is equally critical, and that's really, really helpful. I'm going to come back to a question that's on the chat window here. So it's a slightly longish question. You can also just quickly read that if that's helpful, which is about privatization that we are beginning to see in education. So the question specifically is about overall NEPs made some big policy decisions. Kudos for including ECD, early childhood, in compulsory education. However, we've seen Center for Civil Society, Central Square Foundation, etc. have been working on school choice campaign and developing the narrative of alternatives to government school. The attendees see this as a push for privatization. Similarly, in higher education, the entry of private players could lead to a situation like the US, where one has to pay huge loans to access higher education. Could NEP have done something, and what do you see as a potential? How would NEP impact this, and what are your thoughts on that?
What the NEP does, what the National Education Policy 2020 does, is that it unambiguously commits to strengthening the public education system and strengthening in very fundamental ways. Right? And when I say strengthening, it's about expanding and it's about improving, both. Right? It commits to the investment that is required to make that happen. Right? It commits to addressing the issues that are plaguing the public education system. I mentioned it earlier, it confronts some of the most difficult issues, right? So in a sense, it's committing to strengthening, which means expanding and improving the public education system. That's what the NEP 2020 does. If we are able to do that, or if we are able to do it in significant part, right, then there is no reason why we should not think of the public education system as the default educational alternative for anybody and everybody in this country, right? The NEP 2020, it does not say that we should shut down private schools. That's not what it's saying at all, right? But it's not saying that in any way does it believe that the private schooling system or the private schools are in any way alternative to public education at all, right? So from the policy perspective, it's unambiguously for the public education system. Right? Now, what we should not forget in this entire scheme of things is that actually private schools are not in any way an alternative to the public education system, in any way better than the public education system for public schools. They are not. I mean, there is now a body of research evidence in our country, everywhere in the world, that the private schools are doing as good or as bad a job on the average as the public education system, right? So long as you control for socioeconomic background of children, right? So this idea that somehow, I mean, whoever pushes this idea that this matter of school choice or stuff that private schools can help, I'm not able to figure out on what basis does anybody say something like that. And when you say that, what you're really shying away from, because what you're proposing is that, look, government schools, public schools are, let's say, this bad. Private schools are also that bad, but we want to give them the alternative move from here to there. What kind of a solution or what kind of sense is that? I'm not able to comprehend that at all. On what basis do people say that? And what you're shying away from is the fundamental issue that our entire education system, not public and private, but our entire education system has some deep problems. And the private schooling system is just the tail, small tail, right? So it's as bad, as good as the other part, right? But we have to figure out what needs to be done to improve overall the education system, rather than think of this very strange thing of, school choice or, private schools being an alternative. And by the way, India has the world's largest voucher system, isn't it? This whole business of RT giving, 25%? Yeah, 25% to socioeconomically disadvantaged. It's, other than the name, it is really it's the world's biggest voucher program. And what is the result of it? We've continued to see a decline in all indicators over the past 15 years. Right? So, yeah, so the policy is very clear. Right? The policy is absolutely clear. Strengthening public education system is the solution. The solution is not saying that private schools shut down. That's not a solution, right? There are good private schools. Good meaning they are totally philanthropic. They do a good job. Why should they be shut down? There's no point at all.
That's helpful, Anurag. The last question that I have before I have a few questions just about your own journey is we have a few people who are signing in here who are CSR heads of foundations. And so one of the questions is, for a new CSR head, what is the best way to commence upon this journey? What are some things for them to keep in mind?
One is get down to the ground, spend time on the ground. Two is that recognize, understand that social issues are far more complex than business. This infinitely more complex than business. And they have no simple, in fact, they have no solutions. There are no solutions to social issues. You can just keep trying to hope to contribute. Please don't measure impact. Impact is such a egoistic, self-aggrandizing word, right? You will have no impact, right? Whoever you are, look for what contribution are you making. So I think one, get down to the ground. Two is that please accept the social issues are far more complicated than anything that has been dealt with by your company, whatever the company might be. And three is this, that don't mix up your brand and stuff like that with this, what you're calling CSR. If you're doing CSR, just do it for this because you believe in doing it, right? Don't do it for the brand. So do it because you want to do something good. Because why should you do something good? Because you should do something good. There's no reason for having any further explanations, right? And if somehow your marketing guys get a brand benefit out of it, that's their business. It's not your business. Your business should be to do good. Why? Because doing good is in itself, or trying to do good. Doing good is also very presumptuous. Trying to do good.
That's very helpful. I'm sure the person who asked that question and many others who are listening in are probably going to take away something from it. The last set of questions that we have for you, Anurag, are really from people who want to know about your journey as a nonprofit leader, right? And so one of the questions was, what are some habits or practices that you or routines that you have that you find necessary to keep going in this work?
The first is that I spend a lot of my time in the field. So roughly half my year I spend in the field. And when I say spend in the field, I mean really the field, meaning the same metaphorical Barmer and its villages. So half of my time I spend in the field, which is quite a bit, So I think that's very, 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 very important. The second is that I have this acceptance that we can try our best, and we'll try our best, and we'll do everything we can. But it's not, we are not entitled to see any kind of change even in our lifetimes. So does it mean in any way that we will not do everything that we can, and we don't want to see improvement and change in whatever we are trying to do? Of course we want to do that, right? But in our heads and hearts both, one needs to have this acceptance that we are very small. I mean, this is really a complex world. Right? We're very small. We'll do our best. In a sense, all you can do is fight the good fight. Right? After that, what happens? You got to accept it. So I think that's the second thing. Third is that one has to be able to love the people that you work with. It's not worth it otherwise. It doesn't work. This is I don't know, and I don't know. I've been at it for, like you said, I've been at it for some time. Maybe I'll be at it for another 20 years, 30. I don't know how long I'm around, but I don't know what's going to happen out of all of it. But what matters is, do you love people who are around you? Right? That really matters, because otherwise it can become disillusioning, very hard, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Pearls of wisdom. It reminds me of the privilege I had of meeting you in Boston several years ago, and I know that some of those things that you left me with, I would think of them so many times over the past 6 years, and these are again just very, very enriching. Which brings me to the last question that I have, and I think you almost spoke about it, which is, how would you like to be remembered, Anurag? Generations to come, if people were to think of Anurag Behar, how would you like to be remembered?
Come on, Archana. That's not a question that I can answer. By the way,
it's a question from a participant.
You want me? Okay, I can answer. I can answer it, and I can answer it, and I hate it. I hate it because Dhoni stole my line. Which is "Main pal do pal ka shayar hu." You know the song?
Yeah.
So "Main pal do pal ka shayar hu." Pal do pal meri kahani hai, pal do pal meri hasti hai. Yeah, so that's it.
Well, thank you so much, Anurag. I feel like your time and insights, not just on the work of Azim Premji Foundation, but also just knowing much more about it. It's almost like getting behind the scenes perspectives of what goes on in your life, what goes on in doing this work for years together in education, non-profit sector, and just overall social change. We're very grateful to you for being part of this conversation. I know I can see Anu beaming there for her perseverance and being able to get you to join us today, and very, very grateful for your time and insight with us. And Anurag, over to you for the last words. Like, what any advice? I know we've asked you a lot of questions already, but what is perhaps closing thoughts that you'd want to leave with our attendees listening in today?
Because you're all looking to engage with the social sector, and it would be really good to hear something from you.
I think there's nothing more important than the good fight, There's nothing more important than the good fight. And I mean, at the end of it all, what does matter, That's all it matters. So I'm just go for it. Yeah.
That couldn't have asked for a better thing to end this session with, right? What a brilliant message. Just go for the fight and to keep at it. And reminds me of what you shared of sometimes we may not even see the, most likely actually, we may not see the change, sometimes even in our lifetime, and that's okay. But how do we keep this fight and how do we stay connected to the ground and keep at this? Thank you so much, Anurag, again for joining us, and to everyone who joined us here as well today. Thank you so much for joining us. And this brings us to the end of this session. And like Anu said, we're really hoping to bring you back for more sessions. But for today, thank you so, so much. Very, very grateful for your time and insights.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Bye, everyone. Have a good one.